lot on Embedded about losing muscle, not having the ability to really rest your body in between camps. How do you feel right now going into this one?
This is definitely the strongest that I've ever been. I regained a lot of that strength from McMahon too, but for this one a lot more. And I haven't lifted weights for 8 months. I stopped lifting weights, and I'm like the most muscular that I've ever been. I just spent more of my time focusing on improving my skill set and making sure that my diet is perfect and the structure of my training is perfect, and not so much hitting heavy weights. But yeah, I feel like I even went back to do some like reshoots and can everything else, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, you were so much more muscular." And even when I went from shooting Entourage to the one-day reshoots of Entourage, they were like, "Oh my God, you put on so much muscle." And I'm like, I didn't lift any weights at all. It's just, we really got to a point where we were able to refine training to be as effective as possible.
Why wouldn't they be good for you? I mean, in other words, just to keep the muscle lean and everything, aren't weights good for that?
Weights? Well, I asked my coaching about that, my coaching staff, but...
So you don't get into that?
I don't really want to get into the particulars of it, but I just wasn't feeling... I didn't feel like it was the right way to go to rebuild muscle this time.
One last question on that. How much, when you say you're more muscular than you've ever been, given how agile you have to be to do what you do, I mean, do you get to a point where you may be too muscular, and do you ever get concerned with that?
No, because the only weights I lifted for this camp were 1 and 2 pound weights. I just shadow boxed with weights, and that was it. So I was able to put on muscle that way, and I still kept my arms loose. And I do a lot of swimming to keep my shoulders really, really loose. The one problem I always had, I would get stiff shoulders from lifting and not be able to let my arms go. So we did a lot of swimming to be able to keep the arms loose, to be able to keep throwing my hands.
Rhonda, you said on the UFC Countdown show that Alexis Davis is your biggest problem or toughest challenge. There was a lot of hype like this coming in with Sarah McMahon as well because of her background in wrestling. What makes Alexis Davis the bigger challenge to you that Sarah McMahon wasn't in your mind?
Well, for one thing, I already beat Sarah McMahon. So, my mom always said no one's easy until after you beat them. And so I already beat her, so I can't say she's the hardest ever because I have a new problem. And that automatically makes Alexis the hardest test ever. And there's more on the line now than there has ever before for me. And Alexis really has nothing to lose. And so I care so much more, and I train so much harder. And I really feel like the more pressure there is, the more I fight above myself, the better I do. Some people are the opposite. She seems like she does better with the least amount of pressure, and I do better with the most amount of pressure. And I think we're both going to be coming out with the best scenario possible for each of us.
Did you have the same type of feeling with McMahon before the fight, in terms of thinking she was at that moment your toughest challenge before you beat her?
Definitely. And I knew that McMahon was my toughest challenge, and that's why I think it's one of my best matches, because the more the challenge and the more the pressure, the better I do. And I feel like I fought above myself in that scenario as well.
Would you consider your win over Sarah a vindication of strategy or of physical skill? Because you thought of, hey, she's not going to expect me to strike and throw knees, so that was strategy, but then your physical skill accomplished it.
I think both, because in order to make the striking work, I had to out-wrestle her. And to out-wrestle an Olympic wrestler takes quite a bit of physical skill. And to put her in a wrestling situation would make her concentrate so much on wrestling that she would forget about the striking and leave that open. And so I think it had a lot to do with both.
I know you stay quite focused on your own camp, but have you given any thought to the other title fight between Weidman and Machida? Do you think Weidman's going to be able to keep his belt?
Well, to be honest, I picked against Weidman the first 2 times. I was going for Anderson the first 2 times because, Anderson has always been a hero of mine, and I still think he's the greatest of all time, pound for pound. But I was wrong twice. And if this was the first time that Machida and Weidman were fighting, I would probably pick Machida. But I learned my lesson. I was wrong about Weidman twice, and well, I'm not going to do it a 3rd time. So, yeah. If I was just looking at this on paper, I would pick Machida. But knowing how Weidman has performed in his career so far and under pressure and how he's been doing, then I have to go towards Weidman.
And Sunday we have another big fight, Edgar Penn. Do you have any thoughts on that fight?
Why do you gotta make me say mean things about my friends? Well, look, I'm biased on this one because the first MMA star that I ever met, BJ Penn, came to my locker room after I think it was my first Strikeforce fight, and just because he would go through that trouble and really made my day. I always have to go for BJ regardless of who it is.
And Brennan, they were talking about the importance of your jiu-jitsu training for this fight, because they said that one day somebody's going to come and know how to defend your armbar, and you have to know how to defend yourself. Do you think that this is the situation? Like, do you think that Alex could bring this to the fight?
I've definitely taken her jiu-jitsu black belt into consideration, and I did a lot of training with Henner and Huron Gracie for this fight, and they've really been able to add a lot to my game that I had as whole. Coming from a judo background, we only have short bursts to work on the ground, so I was so offensive on the ground, and I just threw all caution to the wind, had no defense. Whereas Huron and Henner are very opposite style. They have that more meticulous, attention to defense style, and they really helped me to balance out my ground game from being not just about attacking, but also being aware of your situation and being able to escape and dealing with worst case scenarios as well. And so a lot of the training that I do with them, I start in the worst case scenario and I work my way out, so that when I do take these crazy risks, I'm much more confident knowing that any situation I end up in, I know what to do and know how to get out of there.
Hey, Ron, what does the UFC do? From a fan's point of view, what does the UFC do better than any other sport?
Marketing. I think the UFC really keeps the fans a priority, and that you see that in how it is in the live show. You see that the UFC puts a lot of emphasis on making sure that the fans that are watching the show live have an amazing time in the way that you don't see other sports like boxing. They care more about pay-per-view numbers because they make so much more money from the pay-per-view that they neglect the live show, and I really think that the UFC really they market themselves really well outside the sport, but they also pay attention to taking care of the fans that are actually at the event.
What's it tell you about the sport?
Actually, can you send a shout out and a positive message to the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans of America, as well as people that are going to be watching overseas this fight and be looking to you? Is there any message that you can give out to them?
Any message? A shout out. Okay, let me think of a good one. Well, I was complaining about it being hot over here, but I'm going to totally stop knowing that the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans of America are all going to be watching. So I appreciate you guys, doing what you do, sitting in the heat for all of us, and I hope that I could at least entertain you for one evening and let you guys have a little bit of fun, and just come home safe, and we appreciate you.
Ronda, what does it tell you about the sport, how it's evolved, how it's grown, when you're kind of the face of the organization right now? What does it tell you about this UFC?
It tells me that the UFC is not just the fastest growing sport in the world, but I think it's also the most progressive sport in the world. And they're not afraid to push boundaries and to take risks, and all of those risks are paying off, and I'm proud to be part of it.
I was thinking back to De La Hoya and Pacquiao when they started doing movies and singing and all that. You ever worry about spreading yourself too thin?
Just talking about the Hollywood curse, and I made it my mission to dispel the Hollywood curse, and I've won 2 title fights since my first movie, so this is going to be my 3rd. I keep getting better, so I think I keep proving that wrong with every fight.
Put it a second ago, you thought Anderson was the greatest of all time. I thought you said at one point Fedor was the greatest of all time.
I know, right?
Yeah, so we remember what you say.
They're tied for the greatest of all time. You're right.
So let's break those 2 down. Like, what are the relative advantages?
Well, that's like saying that, like who's better, LeBron or Michael Jordan, or who's better, Ali or Tyson. They're from 2 entirely different time periods. So, the sport itself evolves over that time, so you can't really compare the 2 right next to each other.
What do you think Fedor's... Dana kind of dogged Fedor toward the end of his career and maybe took a little of the luster off. But what do you think Fedor's impact on the sport is? Like, do you talk to other fighters who got into it because they watched him and he was kicking ass so much that they liked to see him?
No, I haven't talked to anyone. I was like, really? Fedor was the first MMA highlight that I ever saw. So I was like, whoa, this is amazing, man. Like, before that, I only saw like VHS tapes that Manny and Carl would bring me, and I'm like, what is this? It looked like a home movie, So I was like, whatever. But that was the first time I saw it, and I was like amazed. And I know a lot of MMA fighters that are huge fans of Fedor, but I think because he fought so much overseas and wasn't so much one of the most marketed fighters, that a lot of people didn't find out about MMA through him. They found out about him through MMA.
What was like the most mind-blowing thing that you saw him do? You know, because he had so many memorable moves in his career. Was there anything that you saw him do that was pretty cool?
There was one where he just got like suplexed on his head and then went straight into an armbar. Yeah, that was amazing. I was like, you are a G if you could just keep your head and understand where you are in space and be able to keep being offensive in a situation like that. Loved it.
Last question on that. I know you're busy, but you have access to Fight Pass. Do you ever find yourself like looking at his fights or Anderson's fights and seeing some of those kind of things and appreciating what the people came before you did?
Yeah, the other day I actually gave Fedor Krokop another watch. That was a long fight.
Yep.
That was a long fight. I didn't realize it was so long. And, yeah, I was sitting there for a while. I'm like, man, Pride was intense. It just went forever. It's cool.